In this episode, we'll talk about why smaller companies are prime targets for hackers, different types of data breaches, and what to do in the event of a breach. Today's presenter is our resident CISSP, Daniel Marcellus. Dan is a seasoned information technology professional with over 35 years of experience in the cybersecurity industry. In addition to founding and running two successful IT service companies, Dan is a sought after expert speaker and presenter on topics such as information technology, HIPAA in an IT environment, and cybersecurity. Dan, can you tell us who's got your data?
That's a great question to ask. We'll talk about breaches and why it's a security issue for small businesses and can be detrimental, the types of breaches, what to do when it happens, and some of the ways to deal with it or prevent, right? One of the things to understand is that it's not always have I had a breach, it's do you know you haven't had a breach? So systems that help train your users is a great way to take care of the issue of people taking advantage of your users and tricking them into doing things they shouldn't. And we can go over an overview of the steps to take to keep yourself safe.
Can you tell everybody why data breaches are important and kind of what constitutes a data breach?
So depending on regulations that you're under, for example, New York State has New York State Shield requirements for personal information, but even under other regulations such as HIPAA for medical covered entities or business associates, there's a series of things that you don't want to provide or leak identifiable information about a person. That's, name and address, social security numbers, could be insurance numbers, could be bank information. Any of these things can be used by the bad guys to basically make money, because that's typically what they're trying to do. So depending on the type of breach, these different things from different organizations or industries have different value to hackers, and we'll talk about that in the future slides. So some of the reasons that small businesses can be a little more at risk are the fact that not all of them have all the resources or full-time IT or the systems in place provided perhaps by a managed service company to deal with and protect themselves, create the layers of protection they need. And sometimes they tend to run on outdated systems that perhaps aren't getting security updates like they should, or they haven't spent the time to train their employees on what to do and what not to do. So basically, it's kind of a less secure environment. And any business size has sensitive information, whether it is about their clients, about their employees, or about the business themselves that they really don't want out in the ether of the dark web where people can take advantage of that information.
So, what if you don't have that many employees? Like, is there any difference between a company that has 5 employees versus 100 versus 500? I mean, is there any difference in their risk level?
It really depends on how they're trying to get into your information. So if someone is doing an email blast of a phishing attempt and you've got 500 employees, then yeah, you got a higher risk because your vector of infection is wider because it's going to more people, right? So there's more of a percent chance of an issue with more people in that type of situation. But if you're talking about maybe phone calls or someone coming to your door and social engineering into you doing things, that's a different story, right? Because it really doesn't matter how big you are. If there's someone who's intent on getting information from you, they'll do it however they can. And you still need that protection no matter what size you are. Maybe you're a small upstart that has some proprietary information that is going to make you guys huge in the next couple of years, but it gets leaked out. What's that going to do to your company?
To kind of go back a little bit, you briefly mentioned layers of protection. What layers of protection do people need to check or be aware of?
So when you're looking at the different areas, you have to look at areas that are not within your location or not always within your control, but you need to be able to be aware of. Things like, is your domain secure with whoever it's registered with? Is the account secure with good password, two-factor authentication, so someone can't steal your domain, steal your website, steal your email, any of those things, any services out there that you're using. So things out on the internet, typically we like to see that anything coming into the organization is getting filtered in more than one way. So for example, we use something called Barracuda, which all the email for our client goes to first, before it goes to their email system, whether it's hosted like on 365 or if it's on an on-prem server, on-premise server that's actually at their location. We want to filter out spam, malicious software, phishing attempts as best we can there. Then we have another layer at the firewall, which is also doing all the same type of work. So in case any one of those systems isn't quite up to date or misses something, we hope another system will catch it. So you got the firewall next. After that, you're looking at typically the endpoint detection and response system or antivirus that would be on a workstation that is also doing all that same work. So there's three systems trying to do the same thing to keep you safe. Other layers that you're looking at, which are kind of like the last bastion of security, are training your users not to do something they shouldn't and understanding what might be coming through. And then the other is, what is your disaster recovery and your backups in case, let's say, something gets through, someone clicks on it, and all of a sudden all your files are encrypted and you're on ransomware and you have no access to your stuff unless you pay $1 million. So your backups are the last recovery from something like that. And even the big companies have problems.
Is there an easy way to check if you've been breached? Is there any kind of recommendations you would give?
As far as means of checking things, there are ways to look depending on what you're using. Understanding what your email system is and how it works and how to check if someone else has been logging in from Vietnam or whatever country that's not the US that you're in is always a good idea. So there's mechanisms for both Google and Office 365 to actually look and see, okay, who's been logging into account, where have they been doing it from, and also checking for rules that someone may have put in to hide things from you. So if someone takes over your account, they'll sit there and actually pretend to be you and let's say talk to a client and say, hey, you haven't paid us, you need to send it to this ACH account for our bank because we're not taking checks anymore. But they're hiding anything you see that might be coming back from them. And all of a sudden they've taken over your accounts receivable and are getting invoices paid to their bank account, which you won't be able to get back.
So what you're saying is built-in hardware and software protections are also not enough.
Correct. It's just you get what you get when you buy it, and you have to build the protection around it through services, typically from a managed service provider, or if it's something that you're just doing on your own, that you have to build those things around you to make sure that you're not being taken advantage of.
So I was looking up small business cybersecurity statistics, and I thought these ones were really interesting. The top one is the fact that 46% of all cyber breaches impact businesses with fewer than 1,000 employees. So that's almost half. So almost half of breaches affect small to medium businesses, which is crazy. Another statistic I thought was fascinating was that 82% of ransomware attacks in 2021 were against companies with fewer than 1,000 employees. So
And one of the things I see the most, at least in our business, is really the people who have weak passwords in place, don't have two-factor authentication on their email, and their account gets hacked, and it's usually the upper echelon, the C-level of people in the company that get hacked, because that's what they're really looking for, someone with authority. If they send an email on their behalf, that someone's not going to question it, sending the gift cards to whoever. It's that type of thing that you have to look out for. And those phishing emails are the ones that can be the most serious for a small business, because if you're talking, even if it's a $10,000 payment to a vendor and it doesn't go to the vendor and you're still culpable for it, you're out 20,000 by the time you're done, right? Because you still have to pay the vendor. And more than likely, if it's done through ACH, if you don't catch it within a couple days or even a couple hours, you're not going to be able to get it back either. Those are the things that can really put a damper on the business, because I'm sure you had other plans for that money.
I also thought it was interesting that employees of small businesses experience 350% more social engineering attacks. I mean, that's just a crazy statistic that they are so much more at risk.
Yeah, and that could be also kind of on the whole idea that if, the larger companies tend to be training for things like that. They have systems in place that automate training, like our breach prevention program that has a platform for this thing for educating users. And the smaller companies either aren't aware of it or it might be too expensive, but to be honest, it's much cheaper than having a breach or ransomware.
Wouldn't you think though that it takes the same amount of time to go after a smaller company compared to a larger one? I mean, I would think a hacker's spending the same amount of time going after both, so it's kind of like why would they go after a smaller company? Because wouldn't they have less files or information to give
Y-
away?
Yeah, but think about how they're doing it. If they have 1,000 bots out on the internet that are generating, even through AI, these phishing emails, they don't care what size you are. They just want someone to bite. And that's the whole point. It's not like you got some guy individually sending an email to someone. These are systems that are sending the email to someone.
I feel like the media portrays data breaches in a really particular way, which is no, you always see these large companies that wind up having to put out statements. It's kind of interesting because we normally see the larger attacks in the media, and I, in general, don't see that many smaller breaches being talked about.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, there's a couple things. Number one is the smaller ones may not know that they've been breached. Also, they tend not to advertise that they've been breached. And really, the requirements are based on whatever regulation you're under. So whether it's Shield or HIPAA, there's certain amounts of data that would have to be breached. So if a small company got breached, let's say phishing email, breached their email system, they sent money to someone else that they shouldn't have, that's really not reportable per se. More than likely, themselves and let's say the vendor that was supposed to get paid might know. But generally speaking, they don't really want people to know that there was that type of breach. Ransomware, on the other hand, that's a tough one. It really depends. If you're ransomware, technically under HIPAA, that's a breach, but for a small company, it's, well, we have backups, we'll restore, we're good. Or we'll pay this and we'll get our stuff back, or we'll just start over again. It's really kind of based on the situation. But for the bigger breaches, there are requirements to make notifications, not only typically to the state, but also to clients, vendors, and employees.
Do you think that misconception that it only affects larger organizations changes the way that smaller businesses approach cybersecurity? Do you think that that has an impact in how they view the severity of a breach?
Most certainly, because if they don't hear it in the news, they're not thinking about it. It's not a point of concern. And the only time it seems to be an issue, unfortunately, is either when someone close by or maybe a vendor or a client got hacked, or if they themselves get hacked, all of a sudden it becomes an issue. The Sonic Wall live attack map, that's something you kind of look at and you just stare at it and keep staring at it because it's just incredible how much is going on. So basically, this signifies all the Sonic Wall firewalls in the world report back to Sonic Wall themselves and report back attacks that are happening. So this is kind of representative, and it's probably shy of really what's going on because I think it would just be one big blurry mess if it really showed everything. So they probably have some selection, but gives you an idea of where the stuff's going back and forth and what's happening. It's kind of neat to watch. Just don't let your boss see you doing it.
Dan, do you want to talk about the different types of data breaches there are?
There's many, but let's go over a few of the high priority ones. One of the things you have to look out for is internal breaches, and that's where someone inside your organization might be either accidentally or purposely looking for information that they shouldn't be or shouldn't see. So it could be payroll information, maybe C-level reports for finances, or actually trying to find client information that they can sell on the dark web to make a little extra money. So internal is something that has to be looked at and making sure that your security is in place for your internal file structure on your servers or in your hosted services like 365. Hacking breaches is there's an intent. There's an intent to find information that they can use and sell and make money typically, or if they just want to ruin your reputation or whatever their mode of operation is, the hacker is going to go into different systems to see what they can get into, typically through phishing, which is another type of breach, in order to get a stake in the ground inside your system. And then typically what they do, they will start looking sideways. So, okay, I'm on your file server. Ooh, I found a Excel spreadsheet with the passwords to all these hosted services, I'm going to start getting into those, right? It's not just the first thing they do, it's what they do after once they have an existence in your environment. As far as malware is concerned, typically that is coming through phishing or through websites that you're looking at. Websites can get hacked and they interject code that if you click on an advertisement or something, it can actually infect your system. But a lot of times that's also coming through phishing emails as well.
Can you tell me what industries are the most at risk for all these different types of breaches? Do hackers have any specific industries they target?
Most of the big stuff is going to be for medical information because you can get a lot more money per record for medical information as opposed to, let's say, credit card information. Reason being is credit card record might be a couple bucks a record, whereas medical could be 30, 40 bucks a record. And the reason the difference is the credit card number can be turned off because you call the bank, cancel the card, they get you a new card, it doesn't work anymore. Well, you can't do that with your medical information. It's there forever. Can you imagine, let's say you're traveling down in Florida on vacation and you have appendicitis and you go into the hospital and you have to get your appendix taken out. Well, you get denied because you already had your appendix taken out. And why is that? Because someone had breached your medical information, got your insurance information, and used it to get their appendix taken out. And now you can't. So that's the type of thing that information is used for because that is extremely expensive type of service and they didn't have to pay for it and they didn't pay for the insurance like you did. So that's kind of an example of why medical is kind of worth more than others. As far as other industries, think about high tech and DoD as far as Department of Defense for information that might be critical to another government. High tech as far as patents, things like that are usually a big mark. The other thing to think about is generally smaller companies are also kind of targeted mainly because they don't have the systems to protect them. Even though they might not be a prime target, they tend to be an easy target that you would set up what we call bots on the internet that go off and try to infiltrate systems that aren't properly configured. And the small companies are usually primed for that type of thing because they didn't change their password on the router or things like that. And the hackers can get easy access without a lot of labor because they automate that type of process.
To go back to internal breaches too, it seems like they aren't always malicious and that they can be accidental. And that's not something that people usually consider. They usually assume that internal breaches are you have an angry employee that's running around and just divulging sensitive information, but this stuff can happen on accident.
Well, yeah, for example, if you use Google Drive, for example, it's an organization's workspace in Google typically is you search for what you're looking for. So if you have improperly set permissions in, let's say, Google Drive, people would be able to find all kinds of stuff that maybe they're not supposed to be looking at. And that's the same for if you're looking for information on your file server. If you're doing a search and you have access and they haven't properly set the permissions up and it's open to any user, well, they may find things because you didn't set proper permissions. That's typically like payroll information or maybe some passwords that are saved that shouldn't be saved, things like that. So when it comes to the aftermath of a breach, you really need to have a plan in place that kind of stipulates a timeline of what has to happen and when and who needs to be communicated to. So for the aftermath of a breach, notification is key because there are some regulatory requirements based on where you are. For example, New York State Shield Act, you're supposed to tell the AG within 10 days if there was more than 500 records breached. For HIPAA, depending on the state, it can differ, but federally it's 60 days and 30 days in New York State. The thing you need to make sure you have in place is a plan that actually stipulates the timeline of when you need to do things, who you need to communicate to, but even more importantly, who the team is that's helping you get through this. So as far as your IT department, authorities like the FBI, you should have their number for the specific department you want for fraud. The New York Attorney General, you may want to have in the mix as far as in the email threads of information going back and forth. Other organizations, Office of Civil Rights. A lot of people don't realize that's who actually administers or does the audits for HIPAA for PHI. Having a plan in place with who you need to communicate with and when, and how you're going to communicate the message of what you did to protect the information. Because to be honest, if someone targets you, more than likely 95%, they will get the information they're looking for if they try hard enough. If you're in that type of industry that's targeted, that's where you really need that high protection. But you do have to have a plan for the aftermath of when this will likely happen.
How important is it for them to have a response plan prior to a breach happening, and what should that plan encompass?
Well, sure. The plan is your path forward as far as, talking to legal, talking to the FBI, and you don't want to be scrambling around after the fact to get all this information and understand what you need to do. Not any different than, let's say, a business plan that shows what you're going to try to do in the future. You need this type of plan so you're not wasting time and probably losing money and the confidence of others if you don't have this plan in place and doing it in a timely fashion. As mentioned, small businesses can be this low-hanging fruit for hackers that automate their means of phishing and hacking into systems to get access. And to be honest, one of the biggest things, financial loss for big companies, they're talking millions of dollars that they could lose. But even a small company, 10,000 here, 100,000 there. We know of local companies that have lost funds up to 300,000 to the wrong bank account and did not get it back. And it didn't get covered by insurance, reason being that they willingly did it. And unless they have the proper writers on their insurance isn't going to cover it. So that could really put a damper on things for your year, especially if that maybe is kind of what your income is after all expenses and you just lost it all. Legal consequences, yeah, you can get sued by clients, employees, vendors, all sorts, because you are supposed to protect that information. And if you don't do your due care and due diligence, that's an easy lawsuit. And of course, damage to your reputation, and customers probably won't want to do things with you if you gave away all their information that you shouldn't. And to be honest, there have been businesses that have actually closed because of a breach. One of the last things that most companies forget to do is to train their employees to do the right thing and understand that they need to trust what's coming at them, but they need to verify that it's who they think they are or what they think it is. And the breach prevention platform is designed over time to train employees in security, as well as understanding what to look for, let's say in phishing attempts. It requires the privacy and security officer, it could be the same person, to do a security assessment yearly. Each employee does a yearly assessment or test. And then there's weekly micro quizzes to keep them up to date and keeping things in their mind that they have to watch out for the stuff that's coming in emails or phone calls or whatever. The dark web scanning is also very important because it does show when accounts get compromised that perhaps your users have created accounts on different hosted environments with their email. This dark web scanning actually will show you what was breached and give you an idea of what their password was. And if you see a bunch of breaches and they're using all the same password, that's a big problem, because once someone uses the same password for everything and one password is divulged on the dark web, they start using it to log into all kinds of sites, including Office 365, where they can take over your email account and start interjecting phishing and information to change bank accounts and things like that. So the portal kind of gives you a nice overview of your company. There's areas for the training, micro training, dark web. There are newsletters that come out as well. And what you're trying to do is your due care is showing that you are trying to train your users. And the due diligence is that you have this tool to actually do the training itself and to keep track of what's going on as far as your security as it relates to your users and their knowledge to keep you safe.
Dan, do you have any thoughts on recommendations for small to medium businesses or thoughts on the future of the cybersecurity landscape?
Recommendation, probably the biggest one is like we talked about with the breach prevention platform, is to get the users trained into what to look for. For example, a typical scenario for a breach, actually, this is a real one that happened. A C-level, actually the CEO of a company, had a password, simple password that he used for everything. There was a breach at another hosted site. People on the dark web saw it, take that password, logged into his Office 365, allowed them to kind of monitor and looking for the opportunity. And those opportunity is PO, invoice, overdue payment, overdue invoice, those types of words they're just kind of searching for. And what they've done is they've taken the account and turned it into their own little bot by not showing the actual user emails going back and forth, but hiding that from the user and forwarding information to their account so they can interject with information. So in this particular instance, what they did is the domain for the actual company, the vendor, had the word town. And what they did is they actually registered another domain that looked just like it. However, instead of the W, they had two V's, right? So all of a sudden, these emails went from the actual account to a fake account. But of course, the people didn't see it. They didn't notice that that was two V's and not a W. So, that's part of what you're doing to look and understand, is this real or not? They even changed the phone number in the email, for the contact and everything. And the person who received it, instead of calling a known number that was actually their number, they called the number that was in the email. So they were actually talking to the hacker to confirm if the bank information was correct as far as the account numbers where they're supposed to send the money. That's almost kind of a hybrid thing, right? So not only did they take over the account, they created a new domain that was fake, communicated with the person actually tried to verify, but unfortunately used the information in the bad email to do it. So again, knowing what to look for, understanding that anything that has to do with ACH or bank accounts or payroll, anything to do with money, you got to stop, even if it's a really busy day, and look and try to understand, is this real? And how do I figure out that it is real? So that's, calling a known good number and talking to the person that you're supposed to be talking to verify that it's actually them speaking. As far as the landscape for the future, it's probably going to get tougher and tougher. Reason being, with artificial intelligence and these bots, they're going to make these emails very difficult to know if they're real or not, because the language will improve. You'll find that they can create these domains that look very much like the real one, just like in this example. And I think that's going to be the only counter to that is that AI is going to get built into the things that are trying to figure out if it's bad. Just like there's black hats and white hats in hacking, there's going to be black hats and white hats in AI. Some of the things to take away from this really are, yes, big organizations can be big money, but low-hanging fruit with the small businesses with automation and AI in place, you guys are prime targets. And a lot of people are getting hit that are in the small range, and they're getting 10 grand here, 20 grand there. It's significant enough and costly enough that if you're not doing your due care and due diligence, insurance isn't going to cover it if you have insurance. Some of the strategies put in place are a layered approach to your whole environment. So scrubbing the email before it gets to your inbox, filtering at the firewall to make sure spam and malware and bad things from the websites aren't making it through, having that endpoint detection and response system, or in a sense antivirus, in place that protects you at your machine. And then, of course, the training that we talked about is essential, because none of those layers are perfect. And if something slips through, if someone's really targeting you, and they will get through, you need to be educated on how to look for the things that look off or are just being presented to you as an emergency, high priority, anything that gets you going where, oh, I got to take care of this. You need to stop, relax a little bit, take a breath, and figure out if it's real or not. And of course, the due care and due diligence is paramount to number one, not getting fined from, let's say, the Office of Civil Rights, not getting fined from New York State Shield. It can help with lawsuits because showing that you actually did everything you could means there's not much else you can do because they do understand that this happens even to the big companies with lots of layers of protection. Those are the key takeaways, and hope you guys will stay safe out there. Part of our initiative is providing ongoing education on security, trying to keep you safe. So some of the resources out there that have really good information, our blog, you can go look at our different social media sites where we're constantly posting good information that is meant to help keep you safe and educate you on cybersecurity.